Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 566 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our sixth book just came out. It's called I'm So Beautiful, It's Ridiculous, Unleashing and Promoting Strength, Self-Worth, and Real Sisterhood. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there's nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, I am walking across the graduation stage on Thursday with my doctorate in assessment, learning, and student success in higher education. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to contribute my dissertation to the field. It's called The Early Warning Signs of Hazing in College Fraternities and Sororities. That is free to download on ProQuest. It has a full history of college fraternities and sororities. It talks about how hazing started within higher education, and it's got lots of information on early detection and intervention. So I would highly recommend that you read it and share it with anybody in higher education who wants to understand what we're up against and the resources that we're going to need to end hazing within higher education. Along those same lines, today we are going to learn about another resource, and it's called hazinginfo.org. Hazinginfo.org is a partnership that exists between StopHazing, the University of Maine, and the University of Washington Information School, along with founders Jolayne Houtz and Hector Martinez, who lost their son Sam to hazing in 2019. Sam Martinez was a 19-year-old business student at Washington State University in 2019 when he was hazed to death just weeks into his freshman year. Sam was funny and spontaneous. He was a loyal friend. He was a gifted athlete, a youth coach, and a loving son and brother. Jolayne and Hector launched hazinginfo.org in partnership with the students at the University of Washington Information School to ensure that incoming college students and their families have current, accurate information about student organizations so they can make informed decisions about whether to join. Jolayne and Hector are actively working to change policies at the state and national levels to expand education and training about hazing prevention and to increase transparency about and accountability for hazing incidents. Welcome to the show, Jolayne.
Thank you so much for having me today, Mike.
Of course, it is my pleasure. It's an honor, of course, to speak with you and to have you on the podcast and be able to give you this platform so that way you can reach fraternity and sorority students all over the country, as well as administrators and parents that are interested in this topic. And I think it's important for us to start with your son, Sam Martinez. Who was Sam, and what do you want the world to remember about him?
Thanks for that question, because I always ground myself there when I start talking about this topic. When I think about Sam, the first thing I think of is his smile and the way his eyes crinkled when he would smile and laugh, this big infectious laugh that he had. He was just a lot of fun to be around, and he had this really magnetic personality that I think drew people to him. He loved all things sports, especially soccer, but also basketball, baseball, skiing. He taught little kids how to ski and also taught them soccer. He was a fluent bilingual Spanish-English speaker and played the trombone in the marching band and loved gaming and chicken fried rice and his dad's tacos and his two cats. He was just a really kind person, and I think the thing that I remember most about him, that he was just very exceptionally loyal to his family and his friends. I miss Sam desperately, and he's still the first thing I think of when I wake up in the morning and the last thing I remember before I go to sleep.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with our audience. I think it's important that we remember Sam and what he was all about because you're absolutely right. I mean, I look at that photo of him and it's just so bright and shining. And you're just like, wow, this kid's going to conquer the world. That's kind of what I think of when I see that photo. And as a parent, I have two kids that are in college right now. I'm wondering, what was it like for you as a parent when Sam told you that he wanted to join a fraternity? Did you have any concerns at that time? And what were you hoping that he would gain out of that experience?
Yeah. Sam grew up with this really tight group of about 12 friends. They all went through kindergarten through 12th grade together as part of our school district's Spanish immersion program. And so they, apart from being in class together all day long, they were also on the sports fields together, and their dads were the coaches, and we did, family vacations together. And so I believe that when he decided to go to Washington State University, he was looking at a fraternity as a way of recreating that friend group. Like any freshman moving away from home for the first time, he wanted to fit in. He wanted to find his people. He wanted to get his feet under him in this new place. And so I think that's what he was after. And of course, I wanted that for him too. He chose to join Alpha Tau Omega, the fraternity, and what they emphasized was things that were really important to our family, like community service and the discipline of studying, study tables that they would have every night, leadership opportunities, and who doesn't want that for their child, of course. But of course, I also worried about whether this fraternity would be a good fit for him and whether, he would, what kind of people he would meet. And so I kept really in quite close touch with Sam by text and calls and visits for in those first weeks of school, just checking in with him about how that transition was going. But I never learned until later that he was being hazed almost from the very moment that he arrived on that campus.
That's what's really interesting, I think, about this particular story is because you had a very long career as a reporter, as an editor for the Seattle Times, and also the University of Washington as a director of communications and public relations. So I'm wondering, I mean, you're not, the standard parent. I feel like you have access to a lot of resources. So what information were you able to find out about the chapters on campus at Washington State?
Yeah. I did my best to look into Alpha Tau Omega. I spent time searching online, and what I found were all the positive things. The major renovation of the chapter house that they had just finished, and the ribbon cutting ceremony for it that was attended by WSU's president, the involvement of all the alumni. It felt like a solid community, that focus on community service, which was always something that our family really, really valued. All the awards and accolades were there for anyone to see. But only after Sam died did we learn that ATO had a years long history on that campus of hazing and drug and alcohol violations and other misconduct. Um, and it just wasn't anywhere to be found. For 6 years before Sam even set a foot on campus, they were bad actors on that campus. And that was known at Washington State University at the highest levels. So, honestly, I feel like it was bait and switch. I looked, there was nothing negative about the place. And yet later we learned that there were dozens of times, literally, when Washington State University officials, campus police, local police, or the national ATO organization had to go and knock on that chapter's door to respond to some kind of incident that had been reported. Some of those were minor, some of them were more major, but they were not good players on the campus. And I so wish that, we had not Sam had joined maybe later on, had looked at fraternities later into his freshman semester, because I think he would have seen what was going on. I think he would have heard the scuttlebutt on campus, and I think it would have saved his life.
Mhm. Can you tell our audience what happened to Sam on the day he died back in 2019?
Yeah, I can. It's hard to talk about, and I'm sure it's hard to hear too. Sam was right where he was supposed to be at 8 o'clock on a Monday night. He was studying in the library as part of ATO's study tables. He was there in the library at Washington State University along with all the other pledges. And suddenly they all got texts telling them to report to the fraternity house right away. And it turned out that it was Big Little Night. And we would later learn that this is a known problem on the fraternity calendar. It's one of the three deadliest nights, along with midnight and initiation. So, in the name of brotherhood, each pledge is expected to drink a toxic amount of alcohol to demonstrate his allegiance. Sam and his fellow pledges were taken down into the basement and by ATO members once they arrived to learn who their quote unquote big brother would be. Each pledge was handed a bottle of alcohol. Sam was handed a half-gallon bottle of rum by his so-called big brother, and he was told to drink the family drink. That's 40 shots. So Sam and another pledge between them drank that bottle in the next 30 to 60 minutes. And, there's just no coming back from that. And another pledge from that same event was found outside the fraternity house that night, passed out in a pool of vomit. And fortunately, somebody stopped, saw them, stopped, called for help, and that person went to the hospital and recovered. So being able to stumble outside the house that night was the difference between life and death. In Sam's case, he just never recovered from that deadly amount of alcohol that he was made to drink. So over the next few hours, literally dozens of fraternity members saw him incapacitated and ultimately losing consciousness. You know, there might have been 50 or 60 times that night when a fraternity member walked by him and, or more, I don't know. And those were 50 or 60 or 100 times when somebody had the chance to call for help, but they didn't. Nobody picked up the phone. Nobody stopped to do anything. They took Sam to the basement and laid him on a couch, and that's where he was left to die alone of alcohol poisoning, with his blood alcohol level nearly 5 times the legal limit. So ultimately, I feel like these young men don't get to call themselves his brothers, right? They called themselves that, but they said, we'll have your back, Sam. But instead, what they did was they turned their backs on him when he most needed them. And that's not brotherhood.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And that seems to be that common denominator. I'm familiar with a lot of the hazing cases around the country, and there are opportunities for people to reach out and call for help. And that is the question is, what's preventing these students from reaching out to get help? And is it that they fear that they're going to get in trouble by the university? Do they feel that something is going to happen where the fraternity is going to be shut down and that will no longer be an option? We have to figure out how do we get those amnesty laws in place to empower these students to call out and reach for help to prevent these things from happening in the future. And I think the closer we get to that, I think the closer we get to a solution. Now, you're the founder of hazinginfo.org. This is a free searchable database of hazing incidents at all United States colleges and universities. Now, you did a little bit of an investigation into the reporting of these hazing incidents. What did you find?
Yeah, so our goal at Hazing Info is to help bring hazing out of the shadows and out of the secrecy where it thrives and empower students and families with the kind of information that I looked for but couldn't find when Sam joined the fraternity. So we've started with 9 states that currently have hazing transparency laws on the books in those states. And our investigation found 937 hazing incidents across 174 college campuses. That's just in those 9 states, and it's in a 6-year period from 2018 to early 2025. That's a shocking number to me. It's the first time we've ever had the total number of hazing incidents, not just deaths, calculated and tallied up to see. But the other important thing, Mike, that we found is that just 50% of schools in those 9 states are actually following their own state law by disclosing their hazing incidents publicly. So we absolutely know that that 937 incident number is an undercount. We know it's underreported, terribly underreported as a crime. We know many colleges and universities find ways not to provide that information publicly or don't think the law applies to them somehow. And only 5% of students report it, according to StopHazing, who are our partners in this, in Hazing Info. So, when they do, each case has to be investigated. Oftentimes they get dismissed for lack of sufficient evidence, or they get labeled by colleges and universities as something else as an alcohol violation, as disorderly conduct, and it never makes it into a hazing report. So it's a start having this number, but there's a lot more work to do to understand the full scope of hazing. I really feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I agree. I think we have only scratched the surface. I am somewhat pleased to see the Stop Campus Hazing Act, which actually was passed into law. This was a bipartisan bill, by the way. It was passed into law on Christmas Eve. President signed it into law, and this was 10 years in the making. So there were families that, had been trying to get something like this passed to have that federal law to increase transparency on college campuses all across the country. I'm wondering, how did you react when you found out that the president signed the bill into law? And why do you think that the Stop Campus Hazing Act is so important?
Yeah. It's funny you asked that. I learned also on Christmas Eve that he had just signed the bill, and when another colleague at a hazing prevention organization called me, and I let out this huge whoop, and I think I scared my husband half to death. He didn't know where that was coming from. So yeah, that was really like the best Christmas gift I could ever have hoped for because it's huge. It's absolutely huge to have that passed. By December of this year, most of the nation's 2,600 or so colleges and universities must publish a campus hazing transparency report on their public websites. And that will summarize the findings against any student organization that has been found in violation of their hazing policy on that campus. So do I think all of those schools are going to do it exactly on the date, December 23rd, 2025? No, I think there's still a lot of work to do to get people up to speed and following the law, but it's a transformative law. And um, I really believe transparency is the key to ending hazing. The more we talk about it, the more we acknowledge it, have conversations about it, identify it, consistently define it, I think the better off we're going to be, and the more we understand how not normal hazing is.
I agree with you. I think that this is certainly progress. I think we should celebrate that. And I think it is a step to move in the right direction. In theory, if there are a whole bunch of complaints against a certain organization on a college campus, then they are going to be starved of new members. And it's just survival of the fittest, essentially. The ones that don't haze, they're the ones that are going to be rewarded with a ton of quality new members that also want brotherhood, not the physical or the mental abuse. And I think that that's common across the board. I'm wondering, are
There's
there?
one other aspect, Mike, that I wanted to talk about with Stop Campus Hazing because it can get overlooked.
Yeah.
There's a second piece of this in October of 2026. All colleges and universities will need to report their hazing data along with other campus crimes like they're already reporting
Mhm.
to the US Department of Education, to the federal government. So I actually think that's the more important date on the calendar. It will you know, let us know how many hazing incidents have been reported, not just those that resulted in formal findings and made their way through this investigative process and into the report. This is going to be everything, and it's going to be reported right alongside arsons and assaults and burglaries. And we're going to be able to start to get a deeper picture of what hazing really looks like. And I think we're going to be surprised. I think we're going to see more of it than anyone really realizes is happening because we haven't been connecting the dots. We think of these as sort of one-off unfortunate incidents, when in fact there's a pattern hazing that's going on across the country.
Yeah, you make a great point. I think you're absolutely right. I think that number is going to be astounding in terms of the total number of cases. The other pieces to the Stop Campus Hazing Act, of course, is education. That needs to happen,
Yeah.
research-based education on college campuses around the country. And it also gave a formal definition of what hazing is. As you know, the definitions, they range widely depending on which state you were in, with each individual state law defining it. And now we have a federal definition. So I think we are making progress. And I think you're right. Once all of those deadlines pass, then we get to see the total number and frequency that's happening around the country. Now,
Right. And there will be financial consequences too, if I can just add on, for those schools that don't hit their deadlines and report as part of their Clery reports.
yeah, I 100% agree. I think this is exactly what's needed. Are there any warning signs or red flags that the students and also the parents should be looking for?
You know, there are so many things that in retrospect, I think if I had been more educated about hazing, I might have spotted in Sam. For example, he lost weight those first few months of school, and I chalked it up to, he's walking between classes, he's trying to get between classes and his responsibilities with the fraternity, he's playing some soccer, he's looking for a job. I just chalked it up to the change in environment. And I wish I'd asked more questions. I really do. He was fatigued a lot, and I now realize he was having to get up some mornings at 5:30 in the morning to make it over to the fraternity house in time to clean up from an event the night before. Sometimes the pledges were called there so early in the morning, they were on their hands and knees with toothbrushes listening to death metal music cranked up on high while scrubbing the floors to clean them. So that's hazing, obviously, and we didn't know about it until too late. Other warning signs that I think parents should watch for would be, reluctance to share details about their new fraternity and their new friend group with you. um, Unexplained injuries. I've heard of a family that their son came home for a break and was walking between the bathroom and his bedroom after getting out of the shower, and the father spotted marks and bruises all down his back and knew that something wasn't right, and that's what prompted them to get him out of there and protect him. um, Unusual posts on social media, carrying unusual things in their pockets or backpacks because they're required to have a certain thing on their person at all times. So those are some of the warning flags that I've noticed or read about.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned the financial piece for the universities that don't report. Is there any other ways that we can encourage more colleges and universities to be more transparent about the hazing on their campus?
I think it varies right now. I think there are colleges and universities that are trying their level best to share information, to take a public health approach to hazing, to really treat it as the serious health issue, mental health and physical health issue that it is. But honestly, I'm not going to mince words here. In most cases, colleges and universities already know who the bad actors are on their campus for the reasons that we talked about earlier. They know which organizations have a history of hazing and even which coaches are looking the other way while their athletes are being hazed, right? The campuses are rumor mills, and these aren't secrets unless you're just arriving on a campus for the first time when you don't have the benefit of knowing what is going on that campus until you've had a little time there. It's past time for national fraternity and sorority organizations and for the colleges that host their chapters to simply stop tolerating hazing. And we hear it and we see it in hazing policies all the time, zero tolerance for hazing, but that needs to mean something. It has to mean that there are consequences. The fact is that too many fraternity leaders at the national level look the other way, or even in some cases cover up the bad behavior of their chapters. And they're making money off of the dues and fees that students and their families pay. It's a business relationship. And I find that, you know, in my case, with Washington State University, and I've heard many parents talk about this, university leaders are tolerating that bad behavior because fraternity alumni are some of their most generous donors. And so, at WSU knew about ATO's track record at Washington State at the highest levels, but they did nothing. They didn't follow their own no hazing policy. They kept that information and went out of their way to promote and protect ATO, and their members had given millions of dollars to the university. So it's my belief that it's time for us to all just really be open about Hazing, yes, it's on individual members who are hazing each other. It's on chapters that have bad, quote unquote, traditions that they continue to maintain over time. But it's also about the context, the college campus context in which that's happening and the culture of that place. And that's where universities and colleges really need to step in and take a hard look.
Earlier we talked a little bit about that bystander intervention piece. How do we get more students to intervene like they did with that one student who fell out of the fraternity house? And they got help for that student. But obviously with Sam, they didn't. And I'm thinking that having amnesty policies might empower the students to then call, knowing that they're not going to get in trouble. They'll call for help and get the help that Sam needed at that point. So, how do we encourage these students to come forward and report hazing when the students are really fearful that they're going to get into trouble, whether that be themselves or the chapter, and perhaps even be subjected to retaliation by other students? Is there anything else other than these amnesty policies?
That's a real question. And I think it's the hardest question of all, really.
Mhm.
Doing the right thing to protect yourself or to protect a friend who may be experiencing hazing, that means taking a risk by reporting it. And I think it's a really brave, brave act to report hazing. It makes sense in the abstract, but as you say, there are a lot of factors that go into that. And it scares students off from reporting because they're worried that they'll take the fall, right? That their fraternity will blame them, that the campus will blame them. And, let's be honest, that has happened sometimes.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I think about the young men who hazed Sam. They have to live with the consequences of what they did. After a 14-month investigation, the county prosecutor in our case decided to charge 15 young men with furnishing alcohol to minors, which was the highest charge at that time that he could bring. The statute of limitations on hazing had already expired. So they got almost no punishment for that. Sam's so-called big brother pleaded guilty to furnishing the rum that Sam had to drink that night, and he was sentenced to 19 days in jail, 1 day for each year of Sam's life at our request. Now, if you Google that big brother's name, you get 4 pages of search results about his role in Sam's death, what happened that night, the body cam footage of his police interviews. He is forever tagged with Sam's death. And, a lot of employers now use Google to screen job applicants. How easy do you think it'll be for him to get a job going forward? The same is true for many of the young men who were charged in connection with Sam's death. What happens when they have to undergo a criminal background check, or when their girlfriend or their girlfriend's parents Google him and find out about that connection? So, there's a legal toll. There's also an emotional toll on them. I wonder, does it haunt these young men like it does me? Do people treat them differently now? I just it's a risk to report hazing, and we have to acknowledge that. But you're avoiding so much heartache and so much trauma for yourself, for somebody's life you might be saving, for that person's family, for your campus community. So I think we just have to keep talking about ways to normalize it and to remove the fear factor and to help our students make good decisions and um, smart decisions and adult decisions based on what is right and just not what's easy.
Yeah. Part of it is definitely the legal system. I agree with you. We need the laws in place that are going to allow the people who are responsible for these hazing deaths to be prosecuted properly. And that goes well beyond 19 days in jail. So part of it is that holding the feet to the fire to these judges that have these cases in front of them to properly execute the law in a way that dissuades other students from engaging in similar behavior because they say, wow, this student got X penalty, which is very large, and we're not going to go down that road. And certainly, I agree with you. I talk about that a lot, where the students, their goal in going to college is to get a higher paying job. That's why they're paying all that money to that institution, because they believe with that degree on the wall, that's going to enable them to get a higher paying job, a better opportunity than without that degree. And so, obviously, having a criminal record, whether it be a misdemeanor or a felony, those things are not going to help these students get jobs. So I 100% agree with you. It's contrary to the student's goal in getting to campus. So I agree with you on all those points. But really, I do think that the justice system definitely plays a huge role here in dissuading other students from engaging in other behavior. If the judge lets them off, then that's just a signal to other students that, well, then there's really no um, repercussions to those actions, right? Um,
Right. And I would say even Mike that it's systemic, right? It's not just a judge's individual decision, although that plays a key part,
mhm,
but it's also how seriously does your state take hazing? Up until, the passage of the Stop Campus Hazing Act, we haven't had a national anti-hazing law. And so it's been up to each individual state.
mhm,
And as I said, we have 9 states with transparency laws. We have 44 states with any kind of hazing law on the books. I'm not sure how many have felony hazing laws, but oftentimes the champions for those are the families of young men and women who have died from hazing. And so I know, hazing is a complex, multifaceted issue. It's psychological, it's societal, it's social, it's everything.
mhm.
And I think we have to come at it in that way too, with multiple solutions, one of which is making hazing a felony, but we can't stop there. It also has to be about prevention and bystander intervention and education and transparency.
Yep, all those things are very important. For all the fraternity and sorority members who are listening to this story here today, how can they honor Sam's memory through their actions in their own chapters?
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, I would love to see individual chapters share hazing info on their organization's social media channels. We have a lot of content there right now, and we're active on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. Not so popular probably with your audience, but yeah, working on building up our presence everywhere. I would love for people to just share the facts about hazing. And I think that steady drumbeat of conversation about hazing is what's going to help us dismantle it,
Yeah.
bring it out of the shadows, like I said. Also, of course, reporting hazing. You can do that anonymously, but as I've gotten more and more into reporting about hazing, I've heard a lot from campus officials that it's really important that you include enough information so that they have something to go on. It's not enough to say that I was at a party, at a named unnamed fraternity on Saturday night and I saw something that I identified as hazing. You've got to be able to include at least a little bit of detail so they know where to go and they can pursue that and follow up. Um, and I think, truly, I think each and every campus or each and every fraternity or sorority member can demonstrate real leadership by speaking up for making their organizations safe and welcoming and positive for all. After all, you're choosing these young people to join you, right? You're choosing the pledges. Why would you want to put them through pain in order to have them join you? You've selected them already. They've met your criteria. So shouldn't we be opening the doors for them and not closing the doors on them? I think generally it's going to need to come from the students. They're going to have to stand up and say enough when it comes to hazing. And I believe that you as a student have the right and the ability to make this the year that hazing ends in your organization. You can choose what happens behind your own closed doors. And that's where real change is going to come from.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And there are other students in your organization that feel the same way that you do about ending hazing in that organization. So I think it comes from starting those conversations one-on-one over breakfast or lunch or working out at the gym and having those conversations and saying, hey, this is the change that we need to make. Will you back me up when we end this thing? And slowly but surely gaining all of those advocates that are going to step in for you and say, you know what? hey, Jolayne is right, and we need to make this change today. So yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that. I think you're right. It is up to the students, and they have to decide that the time has come that this is
Yeah.
going to end.
And
Um,
the evidence really supports that. I think there's evidence from research studies that say that students perceive that there's more tolerance for hazing on their campuses than there actually is.
yeah,
So students who are anti-hazing are actually in the majority. They just may not realize that. There's a whole
yeah.
community of people out there that don't believe that hazing is the way to build a strong organization.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There's a ton of people that feel the same way that you do. But sometimes you might feel that that's not the case for whatever reason. But when you talk to them one on one, they're probably going to agree with you. So I think that's important to kind of dispel that myth. So really, really good stuff. This has been a really great conversation. Is there anything that gives you hope when it comes to this idea of ending hazing?
Great question to end on. I really feel like this is a really hopeful time, maybe more than it's ever been, toward the goal of ending hazing. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. As I said, transparency is an absolute game changer here. We're talking about it more. Parents and students are kind of disgusted, really, and fed up with these behaviors. And we talk a lot about the importance of mental health for students, and getting help when you need it. And this is, hazing is absolutely in contradiction to good mental health. So that's I believe we're starting to normalize um, conversations about hazing and its negative effects, which is great. We've also got, of course, the Stop Campus Hazing Act requirements, which we've talked about, and this new standardized definition of what is hazing. So we don't have to guess anymore what is hazing and what isn't. There's also a new national study of student hazing that's about to relaunch. So they're going to be reaching out to thousands of college students across hundreds of college campuses from the University of Maine and the research organization StopHazing. And they will be redoing a study that they did in 2008 so that we'll have actual current data to understand what hazing looks like in today's context, and then to help create prevention solutions that are evidence informed and have data backing them. And from my own perspective, just on a personal level, our hazing info, we currently have 9 states. We're expanding very soon to all 50 states. And I feel like this is Sam's legacy. I believe that by sharing Sam's story, we may be able to save at least one life for the one that was taken from us. And I find that so meaningful and so impactful. I think it's time for students and families to have access to the same information that colleges and universities and National Greek organizations and athletic departments already know about which organizations are safe to join. It's leveling the playing field so that their students are joining the good communities and avoiding the ones that are so dangerous that they should no longer be operating.
There's no question in my mind, you're definitely saving lives with your words. So I really appreciate you being on the show here today to share all this information with college students all over the nation. Of course, the website is hazinginfo.org. So feel free to go to that website and then share that information out on your local chapter social media accounts. So that way we can share all of that information widely. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing this important story. I have no doubt that you have saved lives in sharing Sam's story. So thank you for that, and I'm just so appreciative of the time that you've given us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to connect with you and with your audience.
Of course. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Jolayne, if you think that it's important, I want you to like this on social media and I want you to share this interview with every fraternity and sorority student that you know on campus. It's really, really important that they hear her words and then also get access to hazinginfo.org so that way they can see all the latest research that's out there. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thank you, and bye for now.